Hello, I'm Caleb. I'm a licensed agent and I offer photo and video services for residential and commercial properties. I've been asked to talk about the importance of angles and lighting as well as my turnaround time for after photos are taken. While brainstorming an outline, I had a few initial thoughts, being one, do you really care about the angles your photographer is shooting at? And two, shouldn't you be able to just trust that the person you hired will be good at their job? I started thinking that maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to explain my thought process of choosing angles and teaching you the limitations of a camera so everyone has realistic expectations of how a space can be photographed. Another realization I had is that many of my ideas for this presentation come down to making sure the space is photo ready before I even get there. I'll mention some of the things that might not be so obvious or that I think are most helpful, but I would be boring you for a very long time if I listed out everything instead of just offering a checklist you can use to walk through with your client. If the property is photo ready, then taking the photos, editing them, and delivering them will be quick and easy. A photographer can do a lot to make a really nice space look poor with terrible composition and lack of editing skills, but we can't do a whole lot to make a really terribly kept space look fantastic. I've been surprised how many agents are seeing the space for the first time as we meet at the property. Please don't assume your clients are going to make their property magazine ready or even know what that would look like. In a dream world, you'd only ever sell new construction and properties owned by a professional stager and a contractor power couple. In the real world, people actually use their homes, and evidence of that is typically sprawled out everywhere. Their version of clean, compared to how it may be normally, is almost certainly still a long way from spotless. If a professional cleaner is needed, please don't schedule your photographer to come out at the exact moment the cleaner is estimated they'd finish. It's going to end up being two people politely wishing the other would get the heck out of the way. I have no problem moving a trash can from the street on garbage day, hiding a laundry basket in a closet, straightening out chairs, or putting toilet seats down, but the photographer is not a staging professional, janitor, or landscaper. Personally, I won't move much of anything from its position when I enter home. Too many times I've gone to move curtains and the whole rod has come down, or I've opened a super janky door that I can't get to lock again, or gone to hide stuff on a nightstand in a drawer and I find a gun. I'm not trying to be liable for breaking something, scratching the floor, moving a chair, or being blamed for something gone missing because I hid too many things a little too well. The safest practice is if you don't want something in the photograph, it should be hidden in a coat closet or garage or anywhere it is completely out of sight. Next important thing to do getting a house ready for photos is lighting. Make sure that every ceiling fan and chandelier aren't missing 2 out of the 5 light bulbs. Make sure every light is the same color temperature, especially as the ones right next to it. In a perfect world, every artificial light source at the property would be a daylight bulb, but I'm happy enough with bulbs that aren't burnt out or every color of the rainbow. Without going into too much detail, I'll just quickly mention that the more color variation in light sources, the more color cast. This is when a surface that's supposed to be, say, white takes on a bluish color from the sky or a grassy green, or the white wall is fully orange because it's lit primarily by a warm white bulb overhead. Photoshop is a great tool, but it still has its limits. I can't change all the lighting in a room without completely recreating it in 3D space, and I don't get paid enough for all that. Singular cables hanging down from a TV on a blank wall may be easy enough to remove. A rat's nest of cables on the floor I can't do anything about. I regularly remove my camera from mirrors when shooting in small bathrooms when there's nowhere else to put the tripod. That doesn't mean I can magically make a cluttered mess with no lighting into the most desired property in the valley. I can't make a catch-all room into a perfectly staged office. Without going into specifics, the best way I can explain the limitations of Photoshop is that the computer has no idea what's supposed to be behind, say, a pile of boxes. Things that are able to be replaced are often isolated on a blank surface, so the computer can make a guess that you want to turn that object into the blank wall behind it. If half of a wall is covered by things, the computer has no idea what's supposed to be the wall, where the floor starts, and especially where light and shadow are supposed to fall. If a room is extremely messy, the photo delivered to you is going to be of a messy room. This goes for exterior shots as well, but an extra consideration is the neighbors. I won't be moving the neighbors' things at all for obvious reasons. But if the client has a positive relationship with the neighbor, they could ask nicely to move trash cans, vehicles, children that are playing. The goal would be to shoot the property without featuring the neighbors, but primarily wide shots and especially drone shots are going to show off the surrounding property, even if only a little bit. There's no way to show the property a nice wide view of the landscape, but also not show the house that's butted right up next to it. Let's talk about angles and some more limitations of a camera. I'm going to be hopefully explaining enough to help you understand the process and create realistic expectations without going into way too much technical detail that you won't likely care about. I'm going to make some hopefully easy to understand comparisons to an eyeball and a wide angle lens. Focusing on something, you can make out great details, but you have peripheral vision that lets you take in a lot more information than just the thing you're centered on. A very wide lens is also allowing you to point at something and still see a lot around it. A big difference for camera lenses, though, is there is no blurry peripheral like an eyeball. The wider you go, the corners of the picture instead become more and more distorted. This is the trade-off of being able to point at one thing and see a lot around it. Another obvious difference between a person looking into a room with their eyes and a still image captured by a camera is the ability to move your eyes around to capture the space and get a sense of the size and see everything in it. This is actually a big selling point for video, since you're more easily able to tell the size and flow of a space when you can see it from so many more angles. A video, after all, is just a series of about 30 photos shown to you every second. Even a quick 2-minute video is 3,600 photos. A photographer obviously can't deliver 3,600 still photos to a client to best show off the property, so instead, specific compositions have to be chosen. Using a medium focal length of 50 millimeters, there is minimal distortion. However, this focal length would hardly work best to show off even a larger space. Zooming out to a more usable wide angle at 24 millimeters, we can see distortion towards the corners and slightly more blur. Even this focal length is not wide enough to photograph every size space, so we can swap to an ultra wide and zoom out even further from 24 millimeter all the way down to 12 millimeter. We can finally see everything in the room, but we see heavy distortion at the corners, especially when objects are close to the camera. We can use the widest type of lens, a fisheye, to capture a full 180 degrees, but you can see the unusable amount of distortion this causes. We'll go back to the linear 12 millimeter for the rest of the examples here. The distortion can make round objects like overhead lights stretch into ovals. The distortion can also make large objects like a bed that are both close and far away from the camera look extra weird. This is more exaggerated in a room full of furniture, or it's just smaller, which I've simulated by moving the camera closer, pretending as if there was nowhere further away to place the camera. It's not realistic for everyone to do, but may want to swap out a large bed that takes up most of a small room if you don't want the room to look much smaller than it may seem otherwise. A smaller room is going to be difficult to make look big, regardless of how wide of a lens is used, and the more a room is filled up with stuff, the harder it gets. Because there is less distortion in the center of the image, you could technically correct a little bit of the distortion of a large bed by moving the camera further away. But if you're already up against a wall, the only direction to go is up. And you then, of course, have a crazy weird composition, and you have to point the camera down. This leads me conveniently to the idea of keeping vertical lines vertical. I shoot almost all of my shots straight into the room to keep vertical lines straight up and down. Pointing up and down is especially exaggerated with a wide lens. Another thing that happens when using an ultra-wide lens to capture an entire room is the appearance of a whole lot of floor and ceiling. When you zoom out to such a focal length, you're adding more to the frame, not only horizontally, but also vertically. The photos can be cropped, but the more you change the shape of every single photo, the crazier the slideshow experience becomes for an online viewer, and the less likely they are to fit well together in print media, on a flyer, for example. This is the main reason I avoid shooting completely vertical unless absolutely necessary. Yet another consideration to showing off an entire space in one composition is that nothing is hidden. Seeing everything might make it easier to understand the size and flow of a space better than a bunch of close-ups, but this means absolutely everything has to be spotless, or it'll show up in frame. You can tell by now that there are many things considered when picking a composition to best show off a space. This gets further complicated when just one wall of a room is full of junk, or is maybe only half painted so far. It's been said to me quite a few times, maybe just don't highlight this thing. And sometimes this thing that I meant to be shooting around is as big as an RV. This quite obviously limits the shots I'm able to deliver. It's not possible to just not highlight specific things when an entire room is messy. If you crop out the mess, you might be left with a 3 by 3 feet blank area of the wall that is clean, which doesn't make for much of a picture. I could keep going on and on about space limitations and composition and lighting considerations in galley kitchens, bathrooms, and walk-in closets. I initially even had planned to talk about the dynamic range of a camera and the differences of a handheld cell phone capture versus the blending of multiple exposures from a quality camera placed on a tripod utilizing a wirelessly triggered flash. I hope at least everything prior to that little ramble made enough sense to help you better understand the limitations of a camera and why some photos end up looking a certain way. And hopefully you've also got a few more things to consider when you're helping get a home photo ready. I'll very quickly talk about turnaround time and then we'll finally be done. I estimate for an average size property a 24-hour turnaround. Most of the time I go home, I edit the photos well past midnight, so you'll have them in the morning. If I'm swamped or it's a decently large property, especially with a ton of windows, a Monday shoot, for example, might mean the photos are delivered by the end of the day Tuesday instead. Video, on the other hand, is a whole nother beast. You have to take all of the camera limitations and composition considerations necessary for still photos, and you then need to move the camera all over the house, effectively delivering thousands of pictures wrapped up in a tidy little video. At this time, I'm estimating closer to 72 plus hours, especially as I get busier into the summer and I shoot other properties in between the time allotted for editing. And that's my spiel. It's finally over. If you have any further questions or want to book an appointment, you can email, call, or text message anytime. As I often edit photos late into the night, I might not answer if you call at, say, 7 a.m., but I pride myself in being pretty prompt to respond as soon as I'm able. Thank you for having me, and have a great day. That's all I got to say. May the force be with you. Live long and prosper, I guess. Bye-bye.